I'm joined now by Congressman Jamie Raskin. Thanks for joining me.
I'm delighted to be with you, Brian.
So, first and foremost, you have some news that you want to break, but before we jump into that, we have other breaking news, and that is that there is a new trove of emails tying Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. Can I have your reaction to that news from the emails that were released from the Epstein estate to the Oversight Committee?
Yeah, our oversight Democratic colleagues released this stuff this morning with email mentions by Jeffrey Epstein that Trump clearly knew what was going on. He was, quote, the dog who didn't bark yet, meaning he hadn't spilled the beans on what he knew. And there's also a mention of the fact that he spent several hours alone with one of Epstein's victims, presumably, one of the girls caught up in the sex trafficking ring. So it confirms what I think everybody's intuition was, which is that Donald Trump obviously knew about everything that was going on. And Epstein was his best friend for more than a decade, according to Epstein. So it simply is not credible to claim that he wasn't aware of what was happening.
How does this make you think about Mike Johnson's not just willingness, but eagerness to keep the House closed for so long, recognizing that once the House is back in session and Adelita Grijalva is sworn in and there are 218 votes to discharge for the discharge petition to release the Epstein files, that this is the kind of stuff that's waiting on the other end?
Well, I mean, their shutdown played a double role for them. Obviously, they are involved in this top-down class war against the vast American working middle class in terms of people's health care, in terms of SNAP food benefits and nutrition, you name it. It's the dismantling of the federal workforce, air traffic controllers, cancer researchers, food and drug inspectors. This is the program. But at the same time, they were able to postpone again further the reckoning that Donald Trump and his administration are going to have with the fact that he was knee or waist deep into the $1.5 billion child sex trafficking ring that his closest friend was running at the time.
This really draws into focus some of the things that Trump's closest aides and officials, cabinet members, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, all built their brands on this idea that they would condemn the Epstein files. And why wouldn't the deep state release this stuff? And there's got to be, where there's smoke, there's fire. What's your reaction to the fact that they are now part of the very administration that's engaged in exactly the kind of behavior that these people built their brands condemning?
Well, Donald Trump is the world master of projection. I used to think it was just a psychological and emotional mechanism and instinct for him, but I think it has also become a superb political tactic that he uses. And so he wanted to start to blame other people for the Jeffrey Epstein global child sex trafficking and rape ring, precisely because he was so deeply ensconced in the culture of it with Jeffrey Epstein. So it was this master projection that they were putting on everybody else. And he was able to stir up and I would say stimulate all of QAnon's fantasies until they spread to millions of people across the country. But at this point, he may have painted himself into a corner, maybe a hoist on his own petard, because he got people to believe in what he knew to be true, which was that men of power had decided to use all of their power and wealth to procure vulnerable girls and young women who came from broken homes and had little money to become part of this utterly criminal sex trafficking ring.
I guess the $1 million question here is this going to be a bridge too far for any Republicans, or any Republicans, as far as you would imagine, going to see this latest update, the latest iteration of Trump's involvement in a notorious sex trafficking ring, and for them, this will be the straw that broke the camel's back?
Well, we'll see. I mean, remember, we had four colleagues, Representative Massey, who co-sponsored this with Ro Khanna, and Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who these days has been brazen in criticizing President Trump and the administration, not just over the Epstein files, not just adding her name to the discharge petition, but also over leaving millions of people to their own devices in terms of health insurance and healthcare, because she saw that her son's premium notices were going up $700, $800, $900 a month. And she said it's not going to be sustainable for people. So credit to her for, at least at this point, speaking the truth. And some people theorize that she feels emboldened now that she herself became a victim of the outrageous sexism and misogyny of the MAGA movement. I mean, she did everything that they wanted her to do. She was a completely loyal foot soldier. But when it came time to pick somebody to run for the US Senate, they went with the good old boy, Buddy Carter in Georgia, and not her. And I think at this point, we're getting Marjorie Taylor Greene unplugged, thinking about, well, if they really meant their proclamations of fealty to working class people, how would they be behaving? And certainly not shutting down the government and throwing millions of people off their health care.
So I want to switch gears now to a provision that was tucked into the continuing resolution at the hands of Republican senators and the action that you're taking along with one of your House colleagues to combat this. So first and foremost, can you talk about what that provision is? I think it's not getting as much coverage because everything's been buried in amid other coverage of the shutdown itself, of the SNAP benefits, and of course now of this Epstein bombshell. So can you first and foremost explain what this provision is that was tucked into the CR by these Senate Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a classic corrupt midnight rider that popped out of the Senate. It's a $1 million jackpot provision written specifically for the self-enrichment of eight Republican senators who themselves voted on it. It's an extraordinary thing. They've been whining ever since it became news that those 8 senators who had been contacted by Trump or Giuliani or other co-conspirators around January 6th had their phone records subpoenaed by a grand jury. And though that grand jury had the power to subpoena records of anybody they thought may have evidence related to crimes being committed on January 6th, and obviously there were hundreds and hundreds of crimes which have led to convictions that were committed on that day. So their phone numbers apparently popped up, or their names popped up in different places, and the grand jury subpoenaed their phone records. This is something that grand juries have the power to do. And the Department of Justice issued a non-disclosure notice for the fact that it had been obtained. Now, they might not like that, but then they need to introduce legislation to say that either grand juries don't have the power to get people's phone records. And understand, it's not the record of your conversation. It's not substantive. It's not like a phone tap. Right. It's just like your phone bill, who called who at what time, okay, which helps them reconstruct the chronology of events. Well, if they want to get rid of that, fine, they should get rid of it. If they're suddenly born again ACLU civil libertarians and they think that that's all private information and it should not be obtained by grand juries, then they should go ahead and legislate against it. But they're not taking that position. They're saying for them, for members of Congress, but not even members of Congress, because it doesn't even apply to members of the House of Representatives. It's for 100 senators. You can't get those phone records unless those people are personally notified. And if they're not notified, they can sue for $500,000 for the grand jury violation of their privacy, and another $500,000 for the judicial non-disclosure notice. So each of them will get $1 million at least, because that $500,000 in each case is a floor. It's not a ceiling. So they could sue for $10 or $20 million. And if they do it like Donald Trump, they'll try to settle with the government. They'll set it up in advance with Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and so on. But it's at least $1 million payout for these 8 senators. Now, it violates the rules of the Senate because, like in the House and like in every other legislative body in the country, you can't vote on legislation that will directly benefit you financially, you or a small group of people, just like in this case. It is utterly corrupt and it's radically incompatible with every constitutional principle we have. Congress cannot raise its own pay. The Equal Protection Clause says that all of us have to be treated equally, so they can't create a criminal procedure right, which applies to senators and not everybody else in the country. But they're basically following what the Supreme Court did for Donald Trump. They want to be treated like a special privileged class, and they're all going for $1 million payout.
Yeah, I mean, this is the new Republican Party, just outright kleptocracy. Donald Trump decides that he's entitled to $230 million from the Department of Justice, basically from the U.S. Treasury, to pay himself a cool $250 million. And these Republican senators feel the same way, that they're all entitled to become millionaires on top of the fact that they're already millionaires, just out of our tax dollars. This is the party that beats its chest about how are we going to pay for it and fiscal responsibility. Now they're just giving themselves $1 million handouts because they feel like they were entitled to it because they were implicated in January 6th and rightly investigated for that investigation, which uncovered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of charges for the people that were involved. And so it's worth asking, in light of this, what action had you taken to try and prevent this, and how did Republicans respond?
Well, when we saw this, I got immediately in touch with Teresa Leger Fernandez, who's my colleague from New Mexico, because she's been on the corruption thing too. We both agreed how outrageous it was. And so we introduced amendments last night to try to stop it. And what we said is, look, whatever else you think, Republicans, about this bargain, you might think it was the greatest agreement in the world. You might agree with us that it's really bad or somewhere in between. But nobody can go along with this. No self-respecting member of Congress who believes in the Constitution and the rule of law can go along with this. It's just utterly corrupt. A number of Republicans started speaking against it, including Congressman Scott. And a number of them expressed real unhappiness that these corrupt Republican senators were willing to pile this baggage even further onto their continuing resolution. But last night, they ended up unanimously voting to advance the continuing resolution without stripping that provision. So they voted down our amendment.
And so is there going to be any way to prevent this from moving? I mean, not that this overt corruption is anything new in the Trump era, but given the fact that the resolution failed, is there going to be any way to prevent these Republican senators from doing what Trump does and just pilfering the federal government?
Yeah, so they rejected our amendment. They're not going to allow us the opportunity to vote on it on the floor. They obviously don't want to put their own members in that squeeze play. I certainly hope that any Democrat who was even remotely thinking of voting for this agreement would at this point say there's no way they can vote for this agreement with this completely corrupt provision in there. You know what it reminds me of, Brian, is like the Roman Senate, which was said to have been just as corrupt as Julius Caesar or Caligula. I mean, the Roman Senate was a bunch of people who got there and immediately started figuring out ways to make money for themselves.
Yeah.
And the Senate is acting like a collection of people more interested in private self-enrichment than at all meeting the needs of the American people.
And the great irony, the great tragedy of that, of course, is that this is a Republican Party that got into power on this pretense that they were going to look out for regular people, that they understood the pain of working people, that they were focused on the cost of housing and groceries and rent and eggs. And yet, just like Donald Trump, who swept into office and immediately started building himself a ballroom and buying himself jets and retrofitting them using taxpayer dollars and encrusting the Oval Office in gold and throwing Great Gatsby parties, now you've got these Republican senators who see that, and it's just monkey see, monkey do, and they view this as basically a green light to enrich themselves as well. And so it's just outright corruption from the top down. But as they say, the fish rots from the head, and so this is no surprise.
Well, the movement for strong democracy and freedom in America has a very clear target here, which is the complete corruption of our government by MAGA and by Donald Trump. And anybody who thinks it's just Donald Trump, it's not really the Republicans in Congress, I think has been disabused of that
Yeah.
notion by virtue of Speaker Johnson shutting Congress down for nearly 2 months in order to avoid having to release the Epstein file and in order to throw millions of people off healthcare, and by the outrageous actions of these senators who are acting like senators in the Hunger Games or something. I mean, it's just this let them eat crypto attitude.
We'll leave it there. Congressman Jamie Raskin, thanks as always for your time.
Thank you, Brian.